Hey guys, so David asked me to give you guys a bit of an update on the Kessler Wolf project. Obviously, there's been some pretty significant delays with that, and we wanted to kind of show you what's been going on. I don't have all the details about some of the behind-the-scenes issues prior to my entering the project, but long story short, David asked me to take a look at the model because there were some pretty significant design issues with it um, that made production difficult or almost impossible in some ways. And so I took a look at that, and the best way I can describe it is the Wolf was designed with logic in mind, but not practicality. Um, what I mean by that is there were multiple issues with the joint system mainly. Um, so the way the joint system was originally designed was with a series of I don't know what to call them. I'm calling them joint pins, but that's not what they were. They were essentially circular inserts that had protrusions that allowed the insert to be attached to one arm, and then or one part of the limb, and then the other part of the limb would have two uh, extensions with a space in the middle for that circular insert to sit, and then a pin would go through the left side, through the circular insert in the middle, and then through the right side. And there were some pretty significant issues with that design system. Number one, like I said, logical but not practical, was some of the pins were designed in a way where you couldn't actually, or the circular insert things, were designed in a way where you couldn't actually insert them into the limb properly. You know, the angle of the arm, for example, plus the way the opening inside was, and then the size of the circle, and then the angle of the pin part that would attach into the arm, I couldn't even get them in there. I printed the entire 3D model, or the entire model of every part, every pin, and some of them I couldn't actually put in properly. The feet were designed, I completely changed the design of the feet, but the feet originally had these big balls on the end of them, and they were to be inserted to sort of a ball-shaped opening in the bottom of the foot here. And that wasn't physically possible. I mean, you'd have to heat the resin up, pry the edges open, and hope you don't break it, try to insert the ball, and then close the parts of the foot back around it. Other things like the mouth. The mouth parts are separate, as you see here. This one, no big deal. Each one just goes, gets pressed up and pressed down into the mouth. But on the alternate head sculpt, for example, this mouth insert is a single piece. And even though it looks like it's kind of all the same size here, the problem is the mouth is not. So the mouth comes down here and is wider here, which means if you look at the way this would come out of here, let's get a better angle here. Look, I have to go through the model to get the mouth in. That's not practical. That's not possible. Again, you'd have to heat the mouth up, bend it up, insert the teeth, and then bend it back down. Just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It would actually make much more sense to just print this as one piece. It's not that hard to paint the gums, for example, separate from the lips and stuff like that. So the hips, for example, was a full-on ball and socket joint, like a multi-part ball and socket joint. The shoulder was a bidirectional joint, so there was one joint that allowed you to turn, rotate the shoulder like this, and then there was another one that allowed you to rotate the entire arm outward. Great for articulation, and yes, in reality, a canine can put his arm out like that. But it just really overcomplicated things. And then on top of the design flaws, just the issue of using 3D printed materials, and everything was a model. So the body, each part of the limb, each pin, each circular part was all 3D printed. What that meant was the joints were comprised of resin that rubbed on resin. And you may or may not know this, but 3D printed resin, even the tough stuff, does not withstand rubbing very well, and it'll wear and it'll turn to powder, and then your joint that started out nice and tight is going to get loose. So David doesn't want to send out a product, a final figure that's going to, collapse over time or anything like that, so he asked me to take a look. So that's what I did, and sort of the big picture is simplification. So number one, I took any multi-directional joints and turned them into single planes. So the hip just rotates forward and backwards. The shoulder just rotates forward and backwards. The extra movement would be great. It's not worth the complication and all of the pitfalls that come with that. All the other joints are single plane, which in a canine they would be anyway. Your elbow is a single plane. Your wrist is a single plane. In a human, your wrist turns. In a dog, it does not turn very well. Your ankle is single plane, and then the foot and the lower leg of a dog is a lot different than a human. Dogs are what are called digitigrade. That means they stand on their toes. So these are what would amount to your fingers. These would amount to what are your toes. So these are phalanges. And then you have metacarpals, which are the long bones behind your knuckles. And then you have carpals, and in this case you have metatarsals, and tarsals are what's up nearest the ankle. Carpals are what's up nearest the wrist. So there is articulation in all of these joints, which is really nice. The solution I ended up coming up with, and that sort of, when I was talking with David about it, he sort of phrased it in a way I hadn't thought of, was I essentially turned all the joints into what you might think of with G.I. Joe joints. So they're single plane joints, and each piece of a limb has one half of any given joint on it. So let me pull out the forearm here and show you. So if I just move this out of the way, you can see I've got the left half of the joint on the proximal forearm, and then the right half of the joint on the distal upper arm, or what would be the humerus. And then on the lower portion of the wrist, the right half is on the lower part of the wrist here, and the left half is attached to what would be the carpal area of the foot. Okay, so we put that back, and then each joint is put together, or hooked together with hardware. So these will be simple, quite literally simple nuts and bolts. I'm going to move both of these pieces of the limb out of the way to show you. Now these nuts and bolts are exaggerated. I did that. You'll see why here in a second. But this would be the bolt, and then this would be the nut. And you'll notice also then that each joint has a space in it. And this is on purpose. So this is where we're trying to reduce or solve the problem of resin rubbing on resin. So let me do this real quick. So you can see here, each joint section will have the hardware seated into it. So in the lower sort of forearm, you'll have the bolt through here and seat deep in the forearm. And then the nut will seat into the other side. And that nut won't be able to go anywhere, because the opening I've created for it is the exact shape of the nut. So that's actually going to lock it in place. And then between every joint is going to be a rubber washer. So that rubber washer is going to accomplish two things. It's going to prevent resin from the left side of the joint rubbing against the right side of the joint, so no loosening over time. And that rubber washer is going to provide friction, which is going to help hold the joint in whatever position you put it. So you put the bolt through here, the nut through here, you tighten it. That will squeeze that rubber washer just ever so slightly, and I do have everything measured out just so that it squeezes just a little bit. And then the bolt on every single joint is a locking bolt. I keep saying bolt, is a locking nut. So once you tighten the bolt and the nut together, the movement of the joint itself is not going to allow them to loosen the actual nut and bolt over time. Okay, does that make sense? Because this bolt will be seated exactly into its perfectly sized space, you're not going to have the bolt trying to spin and rubbing against resin. And since it's a locking, that means the nut Jeez, that means the bolt shouldn't spin either, if that makes sense. And so that's going to transfer all the movement onto the washer, so that when the joint moves, the washer is between the resin and the resin, and you shouldn't have anything rubbing against resin that's going to create loosening over time. I may put a little rubber washer on the bolt side of every joint, just a little thin one inside. That may be beneficial to just ensure that the bolt doesn't ever want to spin, although again it really shouldn't, since the nut can't spin. But I'll do a little testing on that after I print it. So, but every single joint is like that, as you can see. Okay. Including the hip and shoulder, which are sort of deeply seated. So I'm going to cut the hip area in half here and show you what it looks like from the inside. Where's that at? Right there. So we're gonna just cut this in half. If you look inside, you can see, let me undo the boolean here. So if you look inside, so this would be the nut. It'll be seated deep within the internal structure of the hip. The bolt's shaft is going to go through and then into the actual hip itself. And then let me boolean again. And then that bolt will be seated very deeply in here. And then if I cut this in half in one more plane, you'll see same rubber washer concept. So this is what the joint looks like on the inside. You kind of see a big space here. That space is for the rubber washer to sit, so that when you tighten the bolt and the nut together, it's going to squeeze that little rubber washer there and provide the friction that we need to prevent resin from rubbing resin, and the friction we need to hold the joint in place and wherever you pose it. Okay, so every joint now is designed the same way. Most of the joints use the same size hardware. If you look here, these are all labeled. So these are 12 millimeter bolts, 20 millimeter bolts. The ones here aren't labeled. They're really big. They're, what are they? I've got them right here next to me. I think they're 25 millimeter, but they're also, since the hip and the shoulder are bigger joints, they're also thicker bolts as well. So, but nice thing is it's off-the-shelf hardware, and it should make assembly very easy and quick once all the parts can finally be printed now. Last thing I thought I'd mention is, as you know from just David talking about the project in general, you're going to have two, well, if you bought the version that has two head sculpts, you have two swappable head sculpts. And I really thought it would be the best to try to have those be articulated. I'm not sure why the one head sculpt is, oh, there we go. So the space here is on purpose, and there will be a little system in here that allows the head to be turned. The nice thing is it'll be multi-directional. It won't be plane constrained. So you'll be able to move the head. It's not going to be a ton of movement, right? Because otherwise I'd have to make the space way, way bigger, and then it wouldn't look natural and proper. But the way that I'm going to design it, or that I have designed it, is going to use a piece of, I don't want to call it hardware, but sort of like a neck peg-like system that's going to allow you to turn the head, you know, left, right, any direction, left, right, up and down, even spin it like this, in pretty much any direction, while also being swappable with the other head sculpt. And I'm going to use a magnet system so that you don't have to feel like you're trying really hard to pop off a head sculpt and, you know, feel like you might break something. So, so anyway, I hope that's provided some clarity and lets everyone know that, yeah, there's been quite a delay, but it really has been worked on. I mean, I've been working on this for a long time, going through iterations and different ideas and trying to come up with the best solution possible so that you get a posable, you know, wolf figure, but that's not going to have problems the longer you own it. So, any questions, feel free to let me know or let David know. And but I should be test printing everything here in the next day or two. And then once I can confirm that everything's working as it should, everything goes over to David, and he's going to get the full production going as quickly as he can. So hope this helps you guys, and glad to be a part of the project, and hopefully you got a little bit more confidence back in all of your minds. So thanks.